Welcome back to Palestine Bookshelf. I'm Stephen Heiner, and today we're going to be discussing the Israel Project's 2009 Global Language Dictionary. Now, you're thinking, Stephen, it's 2025. Why are you talking about 2009? I don't think necessarily another one has been issued since, and part of it is that this was originally leaked. If you look on the bottom of every single page of this report, it says Property of the Israel Project, not for distribution or publication. They did not want people to know about this report. Why is that? Because you don't want people to see the gap between what Israeli apologists believe and what they're willing to say to the public. As I read this to prepare for the review, I just got more and more upset as I kept reading it. But I think that's something you have to keep in mind. To know the enemy, you have to be willing to be irritated, offended, whatever it might be. It's not going to be pleasant, but once you get through it, you're going to know more about the enemy. And knowing more about the enemy allows you to defeat them. This report, speaking of the enemy, was authored by Frank Luntz, Dr. Frank Luntz. He has done other American political consulting, but he's been particularly helpful to the Israel Project, and he is the person who is most responsible for this monstrosity. Now, normally, when I do these reviews, I have an entire script that I look at, things that I want to read. As I said, I was so irritated reading this. I thought, I'm just going to go through it chronologically with the readers and give them the best that I can. I was too irritated to put this into something organized, but it'll be fine because it's organized chronologically in the report. And I'll put a link in the description so you can get a copy of the report. It's free. It's online. They never wanted it to be that way, but unfortunately it's leaked and now we have it. And go through it yourself. I really would encourage you to, but this review will go in order from page 1 to the end. And feel free to follow along in that way if you wish. So let's start here. Chapter 1, the 25 Rules for Effective Communication. Number 1, persuadables won't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Show empathy for both sides. The goal of pro-Israel communications is not simply to make people who already love Israel feel good about that decision. The goal is to win new hearts and minds for Israel without losing the support Israel already has. To do this, you have to understand that the frame from which most Americans view Israel is one of cycle of violence that has been going on for thousands of years. Thus, you have to disarm them from their suspicions before they will be open to learning new facts about Israel. The first step to winning trust and friends for Israel is showing that you care about peace for both Israelis and Palestinians, and in particular, a better future for every child. I know I'm smiling as I'm reading this because it's all crap, right? But let's keep going, otherwise I'll stop over and over in this review. Indeed, the sequence of your conversation is critical, and you must start with empathy for both sides first. Open your conversation with strong, proven messages such as, Israel is committed to a better future for everyone, Israelis and Palestinians alike. Israel wants the pain and suffering to end, and is committed to working with the Palestinians toward a peaceful, diplomatic solution where both sides can have a better future. Let this be a time of hope and opportunity for both the Israeli and the Palestinian people. Use empathy. Even the toughest questions can be turned around if you are willing to accept the notion that the other side has at least some validity. If you begin your response with, I understand and I sympathize with those who, you are already building the credibility you will need for your audience to empathize and agree with you. Indeed, if the heart of your communications is a chorus of finger-pointing of Israel is right, they are wrong, then you will lose more support for Israel than you will gain. Some people who already support Israel may nod their heads and say, way to go, but people who are not already supportive of Israel will be turned off. And you don't want that. Number 2, explain your principles. All too often, both Arab and Israeli spokespeople go right into an attack against the other, and virtually no one on either side explains the principles behind their actions. Americans respond much better to facts, actions, and results when they know why, not just how. For example, why is there a security fence? Because more than 250 times terrorists have come through that area killing innocent people. And notice the question isn't asked, why are they coming through and killing people? It just ends with Israel is forced to defend its citizens from terrorism, and the fence is part of this defense. So here he gives you talking points. And it's almost as if he wants you to memorize these, but if you don't memorize them exactly, you should memorize the form of them. So listen to this. As a matter of principle, we believe that it is a basic right of children to be raised without hate. We ask the Palestinian leadership to end the culture of hate in Palestinian schools, 300 of which are named for suicide bombers. Palestinian leaders should take textbooks out of classrooms that show maps of the Middle East without Israel and that glorify terrorism. These are all assertions, of course. I don't know that any of this is provable. As a matter of principle, children should not be raised to want to kill others or themselves. Yet day after day, Palestinian leadership pushes a culture of hate that encourages even small children to become suicide bombers. Iran-backed Hamas's public television in Gaza uses Sesame Street-type programming to glorify suicide bombers. As a matter of principle, no child should be abused in such a way. Palestinian children deserve better. And obviously, this is in 2009, but we still had operations in Gaza in 2009. So even in 2009, the credibility of such a statement, Palestinian children deserve better, coming from the mouth of a pro-Israeli spokesperson, it's unbelievable. But in 2025, it's ridiculous. So here he gives us words that work and words that don't work. Here he starts with words that work. We know that the Palestinians deserve leaders who will care about the well-being of their people, and who do not simply take hundreds of millions of dollars in assistance from America and Europe, put them in Swiss bank accounts, and use them to support terror instead of peace. The Palestinians need books, not bombs. They want roads, not rockets. Now, I am not going to defend the PA from corruption. The Palestinians know how corrupt the PA was. That's part of why Hamas got so many votes in the 2007 election. However, who is the obstacle to peace? Who votes down resolutions in the United Nations? Israel and the United States. The Palestinians need books, not bombs. Who does most of the bombing? Is it the Palestinians or is it the Israelis? They want roads, not rockets. Who has the apartheid roads for Jews only? Not the Palestinians. More words that work. The obstacles on the road to a peaceful and prosperous Middle East are many. Israel recognizes that peace is made with one's adversaries, not with one's friends. But peace can only be made with adversaries who want to make peace with you. Terrorist organizations like Iran-backed Hezbollah, Hamas, and Islamic Jihad are, by definition, opposed to peaceful coexistence and determined to prevent reconciliation. I ask you, how do you negotiate with those who want you dead? The follow-up question, why is it that they want me dead? Because they're going to make the argument is, well, because I'm Jewish. No, it's because you came in and stole the land. I wouldn't care what your religion was. If you came in, murdered my grandfather, and stole our land, I would have a problem with you. They want to make a big deal about being Jewish, but it's irrelevant in a real estate situation, which is what this is. This is a land dispute. Worldview is especially important to the left, as they see a world where basically all people are good, and with education and communication, we can all get along. This is in stark contrast to most conservatives who believe that there are good people and bad people, and that good people need to be protected from bad people. We don't have time to talk about those two worldviews today, but both of them have some right things to them. The most effective way to build support for Israel is to talk about working toward a lasting peace that respects the rights of everyone in the region. Has Israel ever done that? Please give a single bit of evidence that Israel has ever done that. Notice there is no explicit mention of either Israel or the Palestinians. To much of the left, both sides are equally at fault. And I don't think that may have been true in 2009. If you look at the opinion polls in 2025, that has shifted dramatically. And because the Israelis are more powerful, sophisticated, and Western, it is they who should compromise first. Point 4, and again, I'm going to read this in 2025, knowing this was written in 2009, knowing who has killed the most innocents. It's not, P.S., it's not the Palestinians. There is never, ever any justification for the deliberate slaughter of innocent women and children. Never. It's all caps here in the report. The primary Palestinian public relations goal is to demonstrate that the so-called hopelessness of the oppressed Palestinians, so-called, is what causes them to go out and kill children. This must be challenged immediately, aggressively, and directly. We may disagree about politics and we may disagree about economics, but there is one fundamental principle that all peoples from all parts of the globe will agree on. Civilized people do not target innocent women and children for death. And I wrote LOL in the margin. It's true. Civilized people do not target innocent women and children for death. If we add up the number of women and children who have been murdered by the IDF, would we call Israel civilized? And if we were to add up the number of Israelis killed by the Palestinians, it would pale in comparison, even though we're talking about comparable population sizes. Who is it that is civilized? Who is it that is targeting innocent women and children for death? This one's hilarious because I've never seen a pro-Israeli spokesperson on any media follow point 5, which is, don't pretend that Israel is without mistakes or fault. I've never heard a Zionist ever admit that Israel has ever done anything wrong in history. And the litmus test for this, if you run into one of them, is ask them, can you name anything that Israel has done wrong ever? And I'm going to give you from 1917 till now. Just name one thing. They can't do it. They can't, because they can't admit that they've ever done anything wrong. They are the most moral army in the world, powered by the most moral people in the world, who've never done anything wrong. Don't pretend that Israel is without mistakes or fault. It's not true, and no one believes it, except the Zionists. Pretending Israel is free from errors does not pass the smell test. It will only make your listeners question the veracity of everything else you say. Admitting that Israel has and continues to make mistakes does not undermine the overall justice of Israel's goals. Peace and security and a better quality of life for both sides. That is not Israel's goal. Israel's goals do not include peace and security and a better quality of life for both sides. Please demonstrate that through any document ever written by any Israeli governmental official. Someone with power, not some intellectual in an ivory tower. It's not true. This is an assertion from Luntz. But it's not true that Zionists believe this. Zionists do not want peace and security and a better quality of life for both sides. They want more land and fewer Arabs. That is the summum bonum for the Zionists. Use humility. I know that in trying to defend its children and citizens from terrorists, that Israel has accidentally hurt innocent people. I know it, and I'm sorry for it. But what can Israel do to defend itself? If America had given up land for peace, and that land had been used for launching rockets at America, what would America do? Israel was attacked with thousands of rockets from Iran-backed Palestinian terrorists in Gaza. What should Israel have done to protect her children? There's so much wrong with this. I'm going to do my best to try to stay on point as I read through each part of the sentence. Israel has accidentally hurt innocent people. This would imply that Israel would never intentionally hurt innocent people, but we know that they do. We know about the Dahia doctrine. We know about the Hannibal doctrine. If you don't know what those are, use your good friend Google and go look them up. They are IDF policies in which people, innocent civilians, are deliberately targeted and are called not innocent. There are no such thing as innocent civilians. These are words that come out of governing officials in Israel. They're not some conspiracy theory. You can go find them on the internet. They don't even try to hide it. So, I know it and I'm sorry for it. Who cares if you're sorry for it? You don't have any responsibility for it. You can't apologize for something you didn't do. So, did you go blow up those homes? Your apology means nothing. You can't apologize for something you didn't do. But what can Israel do to defend itself? How about remove itself from the Green Line areas, remove itself from the West Bank, remove itself from Gaza, remove itself from East Jerusalem, and then see what happens? If America had given up land for peace, now this is hilarious because Luntz is writing this to Americans, but Americans are so ignorant of how our country was built. Our country was built by taking land. A lot of times dishonestly. A lot of times by starting wars that the other country wasn't interested in. Mexico wasn't interested in getting to a war with America. The Texan colonialists, who were dishonest about their immigration to Mexico, helped foment that war. The Spanish-American War, another false flag. Americans giving up land for peace, we take the land and we don't give any peace. So this example that Luntz is giving falls flat because it's difficult to imagine such a thing. And then they say launching rockets. So here's where you have to realize Israel was attacked with thousands of rockets from, and he uses the point here, Iran-backed Palestinian terrorists. Okay. When we talk about these rockets, I've demonstrated this in another video before I've actually even used this. So I want you to think about something that's maybe twice the size of this. I have held a Qassam rocket in my hand. I visited a home in Stro, an Israeli settlement, in which a rocket had hit the house. The family had gotten a notice on the app. There's an app in Israel for when rockets are fired. So when you say rocket, Americans might think of a giant rocket. That is not what is coming out of Gaza. It's things that are twice as big as this, filled with pellets and other shrapnel. And I've held one of those. It was heavy, and I was thinking to myself, this is a part of history. This is part of what the resistance is. But the Israelis got a notice on their app that there were rockets inbound. These aren't hypersonic missiles. They're basically glorified firecrackers. They're like throwing stones, but in another way. They went to their safe room. All Israelis settlements have safe rooms. And then it blew up part of one of their guest rooms. And I went and I saw it and I talked to that family. They didn't speak much English, but we had a translator with us. But in any case, the idea that they're under real danger, so this makes it sound a lot worse than it is. They were attacked with thousands of rockets. Let me put it another way. They had thousands of stones thrown at them. If you have something to protect you from stones, and you know that the stones are coming in advance, then at best it's a mild irritation. But I don't know what you would expect from people who are displaced from the land that you've stolen from them. The very minimum I would expect of them is for them to throw stones at you on a daily basis. And I hope that the Palestinians continue to throw stones. If I were there, I'd throw stones myself. It's not my right to do it because I'm not a Palestinian, but I would hand the stones over to throw. It is a lawful and moral resistance to an occupier. So this idea, thousands, and they think that it's a big deal to say Iran-backed Palestinian terrorists. What is the problem with Iran for the United States? What has Iran ever done to us? We were the ones who overthrew their government in 1953. And big surprise, we create a blowback scenario in which they have an Islamic Republic that comes to power. And ever since then, they don't have the ability to strike us, but we have to make them the boogeyman. Why? Because they're Israel's boogeyman. And the United States exists to serve its master, Israel. And so they have to put Iran-backed Palestinians. It wouldn't matter. They could say Sesame Street-backed Palestinians in Gaza. It doesn't matter. The thing that triggers warning sign for Americans if you say Iran-backed, because Iran is like saying the boogeyman, evil, dark, terrible. But only for people who are too ignorant. Most Americans don't know where Iran is on a map. They can't name the capital of Iran. They don't know what the form of government in Iran is. They just know that Israel says Iran bad, so we have to think it's bad too. But you can't think of somebody as bad if you don't even know what their form of government is. If you don't even know what their capital is. You don't even know what language they speak. So the idea that using Iran-backed, yes, it's very effective on Americans because Iran is a boogeyman, scary, scary boogeyman. Words that work. Are Israelis perfect? No. Do we make mistakes? Yes. Wait. Hold on. Israelis make mistakes? That's not possible. They're perfect. They're the most moral army in the world. But we want a better future, and we are working towards it. We want a better future for us, and we're working towards it by stealing more land from the Palestinians. There, I fixed it. And we want Palestinians to have a better future as well. They deserve a government that will eliminate the terror, not only because it will make my children safer, but also because it will make their children more prosperous. The economic argument. When the terror ends, Israel will no longer need to have challenging checkpoints to inspect goods and people. Why are there checkpoints? When the terror ends, we will no longer need a security fence. Why is there a security fence? Why is there terror? Ask these questions. They simply assert that these people hate us because we're Jews, and that's why. It can't possibly be because we stole their land, and now we manipulate their water, electricity, cell phones. We limit their ability to go in and out of their own country. It can't be that. It's because we're Jews and they hate Jews. Not true. Be careful of your tone. A patronizing parental tone will turn Americans and Europeans off. We're at a time in history when Jews in general, and Israelis in particular, are no longer perceived as the persecuted people. In fact, among American and European audiences, sophisticated, educated, opinionated, non-Jewish audiences, Israelis are often seen as the occupiers and the aggressors, because they are! With that kind of baggage, it is critical that messages from the pro-Israel spokespeople not come off as supercilious or condescending. Sorry, I just realized that my volume, I told you I was going to get irritated reading this. Please be patient with me. I apologize if I'm being too loud. Turn your volume down a little bit. Words that work. Achieving peaceful relationships requires the leadership, political, business, and military of both sides. And so we ask the Palestinians, stop using the language of incitement. Stop using the language of violence. Stop using the language of threats. You won't achieve peace if your military leadership talks about war. You won't achieve peace if people talk about pushing others to the sea or the desert. Who is the one who is talking about Amalek? Remember what Amalek did to you. Who is the one that says they are human animals? Who is the one that refers to them as cockroaches? Who is the one that sets up beach chairs so they can watch bombs land in Gaza and applaud whenever those bombs land? Who is the one saying that everyone is a target, that there are no innocent civilians? These are government officials. These are government officials that say this, not some crazy conspiracy theorists. Who is the one that's using the language of violence? And in fact, in a certain sense, who cares about the language of violence when we're talking about the actions of violence? Between the two, who has more actions of violence? The Israelis or the Palestinians? More words that work. Israelis know what it's like to live their lives with the daily threat of terrorism. Again, not true. The idea that someone might throw a stone at me and I would have advance notice of that stone, and a stone isn't going to take my life, that does not mean what they are saying, daily threat of terrorism. They know what it is like to send their children off to school one day and bury them the next. Who is more likely to know what that's like? An Israeli or a Palestinian? Send their children off to school one day and bury them the next. Why are the Israelis trying to say that that's them? Per capita, by example, this is far more likely to happen to a Palestinian than an Israeli, by a factor of, I would say, 10 to 1 at minimum. In fact, I think that estimate is low. But the idea that Israelis own this, we know what it's like to send our children off to school one day and bury them the next. For them, terrorism isn't something they read about in the newspaper. It's something they see with their eyes far too often. Yeah, because they're the perpetrators of it. They are state sponsors of terrorism. Israel is a state sponsor of terrorism. 8. Remind people again and again that Israel wants peace. Not true. It is not true that Israel wants peace. Reason 1, if Americans see no hope for peace, if they only see a continuation of a 2,000-year-old episode of Family Feud, Americans will not want their government to spend tax dollars or their president's clout on helping Israel. This is wrong in 3 ways. Firstly, Israel doesn't want peace. Secondly, even if Americans see this as a so-called Family Feud, this is a television show in America, a game show for those of you who are not familiar. It doesn't matter because even Americans don't control the Israel lobby. I'll put links in the description to my review of the Israel lobby as well as Alison Weir's Against Our Better Judgment to understand how much the lobby controls the United States. The idea that Americans are going to do something about this, oh, we're going to stop our tax dollars from being used, this is a joke. So this is just put in here, I think, as something theoretical. But the idea that America would ever stop sending money to Israel, I mean, that's a joke. That's a science fiction novel. Words that work. Israel made painful sacrifices and took a risk to give peace a chance. They voluntarily removed over 9,000 settlers from Gaza and parts of the West Bank, abandoning homes, schools, businesses, and places of worship in the hopes of renewing the peace process. Why is the departure of illegal settlers against international law and all of their illegal buildings, which they spitefully destroyed before they left? They destroyed their own places of worship. They destroyed their own businesses, their own schools, because they couldn't allow the Palestinians to have nice buildings. That would be the worst thing possible. Why is it a painful sacrifice to remove yourself from something you shouldn't have? This would be like a thief saying, it's a painful sacrifice for me to give you your car back, but I made that sacrifice in order for us to have peace, so you shouldn't arrest me now. What are you talking about? Israel made painful sacrifices. You removed yourself from land that you have no title to under international law. You removed your illegal settlers and their illegal buildings. How is that a painful sacrifice? Despite making an overture for peace by withdrawing from Gaza, again, this is a fake framing. They did not withdraw from Gaza. They made a hermetic seal around Gaza. Everything that comes in only comes in through the permission of Israel. They patrol the land, the sea, the air, the broadband, the cellular networks. It's under siege. So they did not withdraw from Gaza. Do not allow Israeli or pro-Israeli people to give you this line. Israel has never withdrawn from Gaza. They simply took their settlers out. But they have not withdrawn from Gaza. They come in and they kill people all the time. That is not a withdrawal. Israel continues to face terrorist attacks, including rocket attacks, and drive-by shootings of innocent Israelis. Israel knows that for a lasting peace, they must be free from terrorism and live with defensible borders. What are the borders of Israel? This is another fun question to ask pro-Israeli people. Trick question. There are no borders of Israel. Israel hasn't declared any borders because they have expansionist dreams. They have dreams of growing Israel bigger and bigger and bigger. So if they declare borders, that allows people to force them into those borders. There are no borders. So when someone says, we want defensible borders, say, okay, can you tell me what those borders are? Well, what are the borders of Israel? Watch them squirm. In contrast to those in the Middle East who indoctrinate their children to become hate mongers and suicide bombers, what do the settlers do? What are the settlers doing when they teach their children to kill Palestinian sheep, to burn Palestinian olive trees in the West Bank? Who are the hate mongers? Israel educates their children to strive for progress and peace. Lies. Israel is the one place in the Middle East where a young girl can grow up to be anything she wants, from a doctor to a mommy to a businessman and even to a prime minister. Again, the propaganda. Oh, it's all about women's rights, is it? Then why does Israel kill more women than anyone else in the Middle East? Riddle me that. 11. Don't talk about religion. Now, this is a particularly American point. Americans who see the Bible as their sourcebook on foreign affairs are already supporters of Israel. I mean, just that sentence is so good. Americans who see the Bible as their sourcebook on foreign affairs. I mean, Protestants, what can you do? Religious fundamentalists are Israel's Amen choir, and they make up approximately 1/4 of the American public and are Israel's strongest friends in the world. However, some of those who are most likely to believe that Israel is a religious state are most hostile towards Israel. Unfortunately, virtually any discussion of religion will only reinforce this perception. Therefore, even the mention of the word Jew in many Israel contexts is going to elicit a negative reaction. And the defense of Israel as a Jewish state or Zionist state will be received quite poorly. This may be hard for the Jewish community to accept, but this is how most Americans and Europeans feel. The exceptions are among the Orthodox Jewish and evangelical Christian communities. The fact is that evangelical Christians are more supportive of Israel and Israeli policy than almost any other subgroup in America, and sometimes even more supportive than liberal Jews. The primary reason for this is that their religion, not true, their crazy interpretation of the Schofield translation of the Bible tells them to do so. This is a subset, by the way, these people who call themselves Christians, these crazy Protestant evangelical Zionists. The idea that how you could believe as a Christian and also support Judaism, these are self-canceling concepts. Venn diagram, these don't intersect. If you are a Jew, you do not accept Christ. If you are a Christian, you accept that the old covenant has been abrogated. So these weirdos, they love the Jews and their religion, and they also think that they're Christian. It makes no sense. So please, for those who are wondering, I do not consider these people as Christians. They're at best intellectually dishonest about their Christianity. They don't realize the logical consequences of their support of Judaism inside Israel. You can speak about God to these groups, but do not extend your comments about religion beyond that. That would be dangerous. The day will come when Israeli children and Palestinian children will grow up together, play together, and eventually work side by side, not just because they have to, but because they want to. Now, I have to restrain my laughter here a little bit because I'm a supporter of one democratic state. And so the idea that Israeli children and Palestinian children could grow up together, that's feasible for me in the construct that I support, in which there's a single state from the river to the sea. based on equal rights for everybody. And that could very well happen. But it wouldn't happen because of Israel, and it wouldn't happen because of Zionists. Words that work. In the margins, I put not true, not true, not true. Be patient with my irritation, dear watchers and listeners. How can the current Palestinian leadership honestly say it will pursue peace when previous leaders rejected an offer to create a Palestinian state just a few short years ago and now refuse to live up to their responsibilities as outlined in the roadmap? When the roadmap, and this is referring to a George W. Bush initiative, was released, Israel released 14 points that basically gutted the roadmap. Jimmy Carter talks about this in Palestine Peace Not Apartheid. He even publishes those objections as an appendix. I'll put a link in the description as well as a card to that review. They are the ones, they gutted the roadmap from the beginning, and they rejected an offer to create a Palestinian state. Where is the evidence? If it was true, why don't you show the evidence so you can shame the Palestinians? The Israelis have never made an offer to create a Palestinian state, ever. At best, it was autonomy. Autonomy, the freedom to run their own jail. That's all the Palestinians have ever received as an offer. And even then, it wasn't a genuine offer. How can you call it a cycle of violence when in reality, if Israel stopped fighting terror, the violence would not end? We don't know that. An unproven assertion. If the Palestinians stopped terror, Israel would have no reasons for curfews, fences, checkpoints, and other defensive measures. But there was a period of peace from 67 until the First Intifada. There was no, you could say, terrorism in the same way. And yet, even when Palestinians are simply going about their business after 67, doing the best that they can, the Israelis still kept expanding the settlements. So this idea is, well, if Palestinians would just shut up and be quiet, everything would be fine. Not true. We have evidence for when the Palestinians did that, and all they did was get more oppression. The Israelis respect strength, not weakness, and for them, nonviolent protest is considered weakness, and so it has to be crushed and stamped. Is it too much to ask that the Hamas leadership condemn all terrorist activities, including suicide bombers? It is unreasonable to insist that they stop killing innocent children before Israelis jeopardize their security and make concessions for peace. Now, I've done a review on Hamas. If I have room, I might be out of cards at this point, but I'll at least put a link in the description if I'm out of cards. But I've done a review on Hamas. You can learn more about that. In that review, I condemn suicide bombing for anybody, for any religion, for any time, for any reason. Suicide bombing is immoral. However, this idea that this is all Hamas has to do, well, why doesn't it just... You're saying that if Hamas were to condemn suicide bombing, then you'd be fine with Hamas? It's a false thing. And unreasonable to insist they stop killing innocent children. Who has killed more innocent children? Again, ask yourself, is it Palestinians or is it Israelis? We have the evidence. We have the receipts. We have the human rights reports. The Israelis cannot come out there and say they've had more children, innocent children killed than the Palestinians. And it isn't about comparison like, oh, well, I've had more children killed, so I'm more righteous. That's not the point. The point is, assertions like these are ridiculous. Is it unreasonable to insist they stop killing innocent children? Who is killing innocent children? Who is killing innocent children en masse in front of the whole world, televised on social media? Is it the Palestinians? Is it Hamas? Or is it the Israelis? Don't believe your lying eyes. Interesting, in 2009, just as a snapshot, this is a poll, and you can't see it very well on the screen, but it's saying TV news is where people most get their news about the Middle East. I think that's dramatically shifted now, no? We're in the age of the internet, and so this is less relevant now as a concept than this idea, but it just shows you how much things have changed. And if you saw the recent Pew Research poll, which shows how opinions have shifted, they've shifted in almost every demographic except older Republicans. And those older Republicans, after watching 2 years of children getting murdered and had their heads blown off, they've moved 2% negative on Israel. Everyone else has moved 10%, 15%, 20%. It's a fire among Democrats. I think something like 70% of Democrats have a negative opinion of Israel now. Point 21. Concede a point. Look for opportunities in every TV debate or interview to concede a point to the interviewer or debate partner. It doesn't have to be a major point. The point isn't to undermine some essential plank of Israel's foreign policy platform, but the simple words, "You make a good point," do wonders among an audience. This is classic propaganda tactics. I've done a review on Propaganda by Edward Bernays on my main Stephen Heiner channel. I'll put a link in the description because I'm definitely out of cards by this point. But if you want to learn more about the birth of public relations and what Frank Luntz is doing in this entire exercise in this report, this is all public relations stuff. How can I stretch the truth? How can I make my side look good? The irony of this statement is funny, though. You have to keep in mind, I'm an English nerd. My undergraduate degree is in literature. So reading a contradictory statement is funny. It says, never, never, never speak in declarative statements. Never. But they just made a declarative statement and they were absolute about it. So it's like saying someone pounding a podium and saying, there's no such thing as absolute truth. Which, of course, that's what they're saying is an absolute truth. Americans and Europeans think in shades of gray. Oh, because no one else does, just us. Especially when it comes to conflict in the Middle East. They believe both sides are to blame. Wrong. Both sides are responsible for making sacrifices for peace. Wrong. And both sides do have a positive story to tell. Wrong. So every time you say every, totally, always, never, or the like, the reaction is immediate and negative. Soften the tone just a little bit, and you'll keep them tuned in. Words that work. The situation in the Middle East may be complicated, but all parties should adopt a simple approach. Peace first, political boundaries second. Wrong. Firstly, it's not complicated. These people came in, stole land, expelled people, ignored UN resolutions, and illegally occupied land that doesn't belong to them. That is not complicated. The second assertion, peace first, political boundaries second. No. Firstly, you need to tell us what the borders of Israel are. Withdraw to those boundaries, and then we can talk about peace. It's entirely inverted. Peace first, political boundaries second. You can't have peace until you withdraw from where you're not supposed to be. So you have to admit that there are such things as boundaries. If you own all the land from the river to the sea, as Israeli Zionists and many Israelis, even if they're not Zionists, effectively support, then you can't withdraw, which means there can't be peace. But let's be honest here. Peace first, political boundaries second is absurd. Mostly because Israelis don't even believe in the second part of that. What are the political boundaries of Israel? Where are the borders? Tell us. I'm waiting. I'm waiting to hear. Also, don't try to stack your credibility up against the global communities. Yes, much of the world and many influential members of the United Nations are hostile to Israel's existence, but the public doesn't want to hear Israeli politicians complain about this fact. The Israel against the world, woe are we approach comes across as divisive. While you should be making the case for why a stable Israel is good for the world, messages like this isolate you more. Words that do not work. If we were to listen to all of what the world says, I'm not sure that we would be a sovereign state or where we are today. That has been mouthed by every prime minister going back to Ben Gurion. Here is another time I wrote LOL in the margin. What will happen if we fail to get the world to care about the fact that Israeli parents in southern Israel need to literally dodge rockets when they drive their children to kindergarten in the morning? Imagine that visual. So I'm driving my SUV. Oh, here's a rocket. It's got to move to the left, move to the right. This is what they want us to believe is actually going on. They use the term rocket instead of using the demonstration of what I told you, essentially glorified firecrackers. That's what they are. And they get an app. They have an app. They're told when these things are coming. And if you're having an attack in the morning, stay home. Don't drive your children to school. But if you occupy a people, the idea that they're not going to resist is a silly and a stupid one. What will happen? Here it is. What will happen if the world allows Iran, the world's largest state sponsor of terrorism, to get nuclear weapons? So let's fill this in and make it correct. What will happen if the world allows Israel, the world's largest state sponsor of terrorism, to get nuclear weapons? Oops, they already have it. They already have nuclear weapons against the wishes of the United States, probably what got Kennedy killed. Israel illegally got access to nuclear weapons against the wishes of the United States. We can talk about that more some other time. Too long to go into in this review. But who is the state sponsor that we've already allowed to have nuclear weapons? Israel has plenty of nuclear weapons. They are a state sponsor of terrorism. What about them? Why are we worried about Iran? Chapter 2, a glossary of words that work. Accountability. It is surprising that the value Americans want most in their own government has not been used by Israeli spokespeople to describe what's needed in the current dialogue. Stop using confidence-building measures and start using accountability to describe what's needed most within the Palestinian government. Oh, the Palestinians are the ones who need accountability, Building. Never talk about giving the Palestinians something. It sounds too paternalistic. So notice here, the emphasis is on what it sounds like. Not that what we believe. We believe that we're giving it to them. We're so gracious. Instead, talk about building because it suggests a step-by-step, layer-by-layer improvement in conditions. Giving reminds people that you're in the stronger position, and that creates more sympathy for the plight of the Palestinians. Deliberately firing rockets into civilian communities. Combine terrorist motive with civilian visuals, and you have the perfect illustration of what Israel faced in Gaza and Lebanon. Why was Israel in Gaza? Why was Israel in Lebanon? Who is firing rockets into civilian communities that we have on television? Israel. Israel is firing rockets, bombing civilian communities in Gaza and Lebanon. They are the ones doing it. But they're the ones who are trying to say, oh, that's not us, that's the Palestinians. They're the ones who are doing it. So if you turn around their accusations on them and say, well, who's been doing it more? Who do we have video evidence of doing it over and over and over for decades? Not the Palestinians. Especially with regard to rocket attacks, but useful for any kind of terrorist attack, deliberate is the right word to use to call out the intent behind the attacks. This is far more powerful than describing the attacks as random. If, then. Put the burden on Hamas to make the first move for peace by using ifs. Hamas has done that. Hamas has asked for two states along the 67 borders. They've asked for ceasefires. Israel has been the counterparty that is immune to peace proposals. If Hamas reforms, if Hamas recognizes our right to exist, if Hamas renounces terrorism, if Hamas supports international peace agreements. How about Israel? How about if Israel reforms? How about if Israel recognizes the Palestinians' right to exist? How about if Israel renounces terrorism? How about if Israel supports international peace agreements? Notice that the assertions that they're putting forward falls into the category of every accusation is a confession. When you see what they're asking the Palestinians to do, ask yourselves, what have they done in those lines? Zero. Or sometimes worse, negative. They've acted against those things. If you're enjoying my rather loud presentation today, consider hitting like, subscribe, sharing this content. It's a free way that you can support this channel and get this message out to more people who are open-minded enough to hear it, which I understand is not many people. Peace before political boundaries. This is the best phrase for talking about why a two-state solution isn't realistic right now. First, the rockets and the war need to stop, then both people can talk about political boundaries. Once again, who is the one who is doing attacks into civilian areas over and over and over and over and over? It is not the Palestinians. If you throw off some firecrackers, you throw some rocks to show that you are refusing the occupier, that's not immoral. That's not illegal. Especially because people hear rockets and they think of missiles. And realistically, they're just glorified firecrackers. I've held one in my hand. I've talked to an Israeli family. I've seen it myself. So don't let the propaganda tell you otherwise. This is a hilarious one. We have all made mistakes. People do not expect Israel to be 100% successful in all their efforts to stop terrorism. Admitting that Israel has and continues to make mistakes does not undermine the overall justice of Israel's goals. Peace and security and a better quality of life for everyone. It does give you much needed credibility. Israel does not have the goal of peace and security and a better quality of life for everyone. It's peace and security and a better quality of life for them. More land, fewer Arabs. That has been the formulation since the very beginning. Chapter 3. How to talk about Palestinian self-government and prosperity. Fully and exactly 50% of Americans strongly support a two-state solution. Combine this with 28.2% who somewhat support it, and you have the formula for a landslide in support of giving the Palestinians their own land and their own government. Again, over 78% of Americans support a two-state solution. I don't know what that's like today. I mean, in 2009, and remember that two-state solution is just a theory. It's backed by most countries in the world, but the Israelis don't accept it, so it's a non-starter. It doesn't matter if every single country in the world except Israel supports a two-state solution. Without Israel supporting it, it doesn't matter. And Israel, in its current political state, and potentially forever, would never support a two-state solution. It's the end of the Zionist state. It's the end of the Jewish state. It's the end of Greater Israel. And it's the admission that God is not on your side. Because if God was on your side, this is the interpretation of the Zionists, you just keep getting more victories, more and more victories, more and more land. God is fulfilling his prophecy. You are redeeming the land. You're making the desert bloom. But if the world manages to stop this, well, maybe God isn't on your side. So you have to realize the crushing narrative blow to Zionism this would give, and so the two-state solution is not an option. Words that work. The roadmap prescribed a very specific process, a step-by-step process whereby before a Palestinian homeland can be created, they have to abolish terror altogether, to stop the culture of hate, and of course to accept Israel as a Jewish state. This is our hope and vision, and there is a moderate Palestinian partner who we might disagree with, but who we can trust for his intention to bring about peace, and who is willing to join us in a step-by-step plan of action to settle the conflict and end the bloodshed. Israel keeps murdering Palestinian leaders over and over, so the idea that there is no moderate partner for peace, and this is also not realistic. The question of having a moderate partner for peace, look at what happened in Ireland. These are people who are involved in terrorist actions against the English people, and they were invited to the bargaining table. They were terrorists. So we have precedent for agreements. Same thing with a Dayton Agreement and the former Yugoslavia. These were people who were involved in terrorist attacks, but they were brought to the negotiating. The idea that you can choose to have a moderate Palestinian partner, you have made the Palestinians not moderate by your actions. You have created, Hamas was created by Israel. Hezbollah was created by Israel. I don't mean that Israel wrote the charter. I mean that what they did created these groups. So the reason there are quote-unquote extreme Palestinian partners, and I would argue pretty reasonable, is because of Israel. You can't choose who you negotiate with. And the idea that we're just going to wait forever for a moderate partner, in the meantime, we're going to continue to execute every Palestinian leader there is. How does a moderate political leader come out of that? There's no connection of words to reality. The Israelis say these things, and then the actions contradict the words. When talking about a Palestinian partner, it is essential to distinguish between Hamas and everyone else. Only the most anti-Israel, pro-Palestinian American expects Israel to negotiate with Hamas. That's me, baby. Write me down as an anti-Israel, pro-Palestinian American. So you have to be clear you are seeking a moderate Palestinian partner. The fight is over ideology, not land. Terror, not territory. It can't be about land, because that would mean that could be easily solved. You must avoid using Israel's religious claims to land as a reason why Israel should not give up land. Such claims only make Israel look extremist to people who are not religious Christians or Jews. What, Israel looks extreme? Crazy idea. We're only about a third of the way through, but I think most of what I underlined was in the first part. So I think the second part, if I might call it that, is going to go a lot faster, because I didn't underline as much. Most of the horrible stuff is in the beginning. There's still plenty of horrible stuff to go, so if you're sticking around, be ready for more of it. Words that work. The conditions of the Palestinians living in the West Bank and Gaza are unbelievably difficult. It is a catastrophe. We want to change it. Israel wants to change it. Who created the catastrophe? Who created the conditions of the Palestinians living in the West Bank? Who? The Palestinian economy must be allowed to develop. Who is not allowing it to develop? As violence subsides, freedom of movement should be restored. Who is preventing freedom of movement? Permitting innocent Palestinians to resume work and normal life. Palestinian legislators and officials, humanitarian and international works, must be allowed to go about the business of building a better future. But there is little we can do until the violence stops. Why is there violence? Until those who carry bombs into Israel stop the cycle of bloodshed. Why are people carrying bombs into Israel? We need the cooperation of the Palestinian government and the Palestinian people, not for our benefit, but for their benefit. The people who pay the price for all this terrorism are not just the Israeli victims, it is the Palestinians as well. If the terrorism stops, the borders can be opened and normal life can resume. But if the Palestinian terror continues, the tragedy will continue. Israeli terrorism causes Palestinian so-called terrorism, which in many cases is just simple resistance. But any resistance to Israel is considered terrorism. I wrote every accusation as a confession. Words that work. Look what the people of the Palestinian people, the Secretary General of Fatah, is saying about Hamas 3 days ago. Fatah, who is Israel's slave. His name is Yasser Abdel Rabo, a Palestinian, the Secretary General of the PLO Executive Committee, and I quote him. Hamas has turned Gaza, Gaza schools and mosques, all universities into centers of detention, interrogation, and torture. Dozens have been shot in their legs, beaten savagely, and had their bones broken. Hamas plundered trucks bringing food and distributes it only to the supporters of their movement. They didn't give the food to the people of Fatah. They killed hundreds of leaders of Fatah in full daylight. They throw them from the roofs. Shimon Peres. There's so much that's factually incorrect about this, and remember that Mohammed Al-Kurd talks about this in Perfect Victims. You can spend your whole life dealing with lies and not get to the important stuff. So I'm not going to spend all the time working through all the lies of this, but it is demonstrably false that Hamas did not give food to people outside. Remember that Hamas is a governing authority in Gaza. So they have to serve everybody there. Islamic Jihad, everyone else who, and there are some people who are not aligned with any faction. It's rare. Many people have some kind of faction they're aligned with. But the idea that Hamas stole all this food and then only gave it to Hamas people, it's not true. It's simply not true. And this, they throw them from the roofs. There is one situation in which someone may have died falling out of a building, but it's because they tried to escape going out of a window. They were not thrown off of a rooftop. And what is not mentioned here is that Fatah, along with the United States and Israel, was planning a coup in Gaza against the democratically elected government of Hamas. They like to say Iran-backed. I like to say democratically elected government of Hamas. Demand that Hamas be held accountable for the injustices it has done to its own people. The difference between what people expect a Palestinian government to pursue and what Hamas actually does could not be greater. Call Hamas out for using its own people rather than empowering them. Put the contrast in stark terms. Here are some useful language tricks to make the contrast really stick. Buy books, not bombs. Invest in jobs, not jihad. Invest in food, not fear. Let's look at each of those things. Buy books, not bombs. Who has destroyed every university in Gaza? Not Hamas. Invest in jobs, not jihad. Who has sealed the border and prevented Gazans from getting jobs in Israel? Not Hamas. Invest in food, not fear. Who has settlers that destroy food and hold aid, international aid, from entering Gaza? Is that Hamas? Words that work. If Iran obtains a nuclear weapon, the whole world will be held hostage. Not just America and Israel either. Arab nations like Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, who neighbor Iran but oppose many of its policies, will be under threat too. Most importantly, however, Iran shares funding, training, and weapons with other extremist and terrorist groups, and we cannot allow them to give nuclear materials to terrorists who could hit us at home. Now, I already talked about Iran a little bit earlier. I just want to use an example of two people who hate each other who have nuclear weapons, and that's Iran and Pakistan. India and Pakistan. They both have nuclear weapons. They both hate each other, demonstrably. We know that. And that's another story for another time. But the point is, they are not a threat to the whole world. Are India and Pakistan a threat to America and Israel? It is true that if Iran were to get a nuclear weapon, Saudi Arabia would want one as well. And we can talk about nuclear proliferation some other time, but the idea that Iran is the bad person here, Iran is the only actor of evil in the whole world, is silly. And most people realize that. That's why we see more and more cooperation with Iran. Remember that when they say the international community, they just mean the EU and the United States, and sometimes Australia and New Zealand and Canada. Because those people don't really make their own policy, they just do whatever they're told. And so when you think about the rest of the world, it really is billions and billions and billions of people. Adding up the United States, Canada, Europe, Australia, New Zealand, I don't know if you even get to 1 billion. You might, just barely. But it's pretty much the whole rest of the world that's willing to do business with Iran. It's the United States who decides to make them a boogeyman. Same thing with Cuba. Cuba's only isolated by America. There's plenty of other people who work with Cuba in numerous ways. We're just a big bully. Words that work. What should Israel do? Imagine if thousands of rockets were fired into your community every day and every night. What would your country do? What would you want them to do? Don't we have a duty to protect our citizens? First of all, there are not thousands of rockets fired into the community every day and every night. There have been ceasefires negotiated by Hamas with Israel in which no rockets were fired. And that meant that Hamas had to be the restraining authority because people like Islamic Jihad do not buy into this. They always want war. Israel doesn't have a right to exist. They want to kill Jews for theological reasons. But it's not true that thousands of rockets are fired every day and every night. It's not true. Israel tried very hard to avoid civilians in their actions in Gaza. Not true according to the testimony of IDF soldiers. You can follow Breaking the Silence or read any number of reports. It is not true that they tried hard to avoid civilians. They shot indiscriminately into houses. They shot at anything that moved. That is not trying very hard to avoid civilians. Hamas and other terrorists place guns, rocket launchers, and weapons smuggling tunnels in the heart of their civilian population. Where is the Israeli Ministry of Defense? Ask anyone who says this. Ask them where it is. It's right in the middle of a civilian neighborhood. Israel, the idea that someone would put their base very far away with a sign that says, "Come bomb me here," is silly. It doesn't mean that countries or peoples are using human shields. It's just that's where we put it. So Gaza is one of the most densely populated places in the world. Where else are you going to put these things? You've blockaded all. They can't go anywhere else. Israel must defend its citizens. Why does Hamas intentionally place Palestinians in the line of fire? Let's reverse that. Palestine must defend its citizens. Why does the IDF intentionally place Israelis in the line of fire through their settlers? Every accusation is a confession. Have you spent time where the rocket attacks occur? If you haven't, then you shouldn't be fielding questions on television about this issue. Palestinian spokespersons have been very effective by saying that they have been to the locations of the attacks and therefore can more accurately report on what's going on. I have. You simply must be prepared to respond to this question. Yes, I have been there, and let me tell you how terrifying it is. It says if you haven't, you shouldn't be fielding questions on television about this issue. They're being realistic, at least. So here are more surveys. Question B, Israel should not give any more land for peace because every time it does, it just gets more war. So I wrote in the margin, it doesn't have a right to give any land. All of Israel is built on a lie. So the idea that Israel has the right to give land for peace, it doesn't own any of that land. When they give that land, all they're simply doing is returning it to the original inhabitants, whose descendants are still alive and are occupied, have been under the longest military occupation in modern history. It may even be in ancient history, it's just that we don't have any records. And most countries don't want to carry on an indefinite military occupation. It costs a lot of money and it costs lives. But Israel has to hold on to this occupation because pulling back is not an option politically for them. The settler crazy people are running the government or are forcing the direction of travel for the government right now in 2025 in Israel. May that change? Yes. But all I can speak about is what is happening right now. And the settlers, Smotrich, Ben-Gvir, all these horrible people, they hold the levers of power. So here's the statement. This is an assertion. The settlements are necessary for the security of Israel. Think about how crazy the statement is. The settlements are effectively the number one reason the peace process can't move forward. And here it's saying the settlements are necessary for the security of Israel. So it's basically admitting we have no path to peace. Tell audience that the settlements weren't created randomly. That's true. They were put on the tops of mountains and in important militarily sensitive areas to provide a security buffer between Israel and her Arab neighbors. That may be true, but it also doesn't say they were also created inside Palestinian towns, like in Hebron. Then remind audiences that Israel has faced a full-scale multinational invasion 4 times in the past 55 years. And this is implying that the 67 war wasn't started by Israel. 1948 war wasn't started by Israel. And the settlements provide an effective early warning system. Cite the onset of rocket attacks from Gaza. That means you're using the settlements as human shields if they're an effective early warning system. Cite the onset of rocket attacks from Gaza after the 2005 pullout as an example of what happens when Israel leaves these areas. Remind them that Israel needs defensible borders and that it would be dangerous to let... Where are the borders of Israel? Again, I keep asking this question. When you say defensible borders, that means there are borders. Where are the borders of Israel? It would be dangerous to let Iran-backed terrorists, you see it, once you hear it over and over, you realize the trick, control the hills around Israel's international airport, enabling them to shoot down airplanes with rockets. That's what Iran lives for. They live to shoot down El Al planes. How not to talk about settlements. Whoever came up with the phrase settlements set in motion a lexicon that was doomed from the start. Well, let me tell you, it was the Israelis. Luntz is either stupid or ignorant when it comes to making this statement. Whoever came up with the phrase settlements, do you think the Palestinians came up with that term? It was the Israelis, very early on. Nothing is tougher to articulate effectively to neutral Americans than a message in favor of the settlements. Let me be clear about this conclusion. Plenty of Israeli and American Jewish leaders have tried, but American and European audiences rejected almost everything we tested. There is no magic language to unify public support. That being said, there are language components that definitely work more effectively and several that do not. In particular, these are 3 arguments involving settlements that you should not make. Number 1, the religious argument. Quoting from the Bible in defense of the current settlements will have absolutely the opposite impact. Even your Jewish audiences will recoil at an attempt to use biblical passages to justify the settlements. This is factually not true. The number of times I had Jews tell me while I was in Israel, God gave us this land. I heard that numerous times from Jews who didn't know each other in different cities. They said, God gave us the land. So this idea that even Jewish audiences will recoil, it's not true. This is mainstream opinion in Israel. It is mainstream coffee shop talk. People will say that. If I were to stop someone in Jerusalem and I say, did God give you the land? He's like, well, of course. As opposed to, I was in Jerusalem on Jerusalem Day in May when the commemoration of the taking of Jerusalem in 67 happened. And I saw a lot of religious zealotry. The number of Israeli flags I saw waving in the streets that day as I tried to walk around and get a sense of what was being celebrated. The idea Jewish audiences will recoil at an attempt to use biblical passages to justify the settlements. Not true. The ownership argument. Some of those reading this document will reject this advice ideologically, but to claim that Israel owns the land that the settlements are on will cause most listeners to reject everything else you say. Semantics does matter, but if we correct Palestinians using the words disputed territory when they say occupied territory, why would you say disputed territory? It's occupied territory by international law and by UN resolution. The only people who say it's disputed are the Israelis. It's just their words to not say occupied. They cannot stand it because that would imply that they are not the owners of the land. Remember that Zionists consider the Palestinians the colonizers. They consider the settlements decolonization, the natives returning to their land that God gave them. You need to understand this, and I suppose I'm speaking now as the opposite of Frank Luntz to people who are friends of Palestine Bookshelf and friends of our mission. You need to understand the way that they think. They think the Palestinians are their colonists, and they are carrying out God's mission of decolonizing and taking back the land and making the desert bloom. You have to understand that. You don't have to like it, but if you don't understand that, you're not going to be able to effectively argue against them. Make sure that you know your enemy and you know your enemy's arguments. Cold. The scapegoat argument, claiming that Palestinians and other Arab groups are using the settlement issue to gain political advantage, may be correct. But it does nothing to legitimize Israeli policy. It may be true that they're using the settlement issue to gain political advantage, but it's only because it's true. It's true. Words that work. The fence is being built because the fence works. The fence keeps suicide bombers out of Israel. Why are there suicide bombers going into Israel? In 2002 and 2003, we were having an almost daily suicide bombing in Israel because there was no barrier to keep suicide bombers from coming from the West Bank into Israel proper, and that was a problem. What was happening in 2002 and 2003? The absolute failure of Oslo, and people were frustrated. Again, I've said before, I'm opposed to suicide bombing, but there's no context given here. It's just assertion, which implies that Palestinians bomb Israelis because that's what they love to do. They come out of the womb, they're handed a bomb, and they said, when you're old enough, you'll get to do this and kill Jews. That is not how the Palestinians think, and if you ever had met a Palestinian in your life, you would know differently. Do not believe what Frank Luntz and the Israelis tell you about Palestinians. Go meet a Palestinian yourself. Go talk to a Palestinian yourself. We had a situation in Israel where people were scared. People were afraid to send their kids to school on a bus. People were afraid to go to shopping malls. People didn't want to go to restaurants. How do you think Palestinians feel? Do you think Palestinians can feel safe going to school? Do you think they feel safe going to restaurants? Every accusation is a confession. The fence is a nonviolent way to deal very effectively with that terrorist threat. In the areas where the fence is being built, illegally, taking even more Palestinian land, there has been a clear and dramatic reduction in infiltration by suicide bombings, down some 90 to 95%. That may be true. I'm not disputing that statistic. The question you have to ask yourself, why would people suicide bomb? Think about the average age of these suicide bombers. What compels somebody in their 20s to end their life? It must be because they have no hope. Why do they have no hope? Again, I'm opposed to suicide bombing from a moral standpoint and from a legal standpoint as well. But I have to ask the question because there is a motive here, and understanding that motive helps you to understand what the root causes are, which is not the assertion, which is implied in all of these pages. I read it over and over. The hidden assertion is Palestinians hate Jews for being Jews. And the reality is, if there were purple people from Mars who had done what the Israelis had done to the Palestinians would hate those purple people too, would oppose those purple people too, would suicide bomb those purple people too. So the idea it's the poor Jews, and this is another Holocaust, and this anti-Semitism. The last 18 months should have shown people that that's all a lie. And that anyone who had done this would have a reaction, a reasonable reaction. And that's what we're seeing here is a reasonable reaction. In fact, I've heard it said, and I agree, I don't know many more restrained people than the Palestinian people. They are very restrained people in many ways. We're seeing this even more so in the West Bank than in Gaza. Gaza is definitely more militant than the West Bank, and no one in the West Bank would deny that. But there's a lot of restraint on the side of the Palestinians. A lot of restraint on the side of the Iranians as well. Provocation. Israel bombs their embassy in Damascus, kills their people, waiting for a provocation. Waiting for a provocation. The Iranians do not want to get into a conflict, in part because they know it will be very hard on them and their people, and that's not what they're about. They're not about that life. 1. Call for a refusal to turn back the clock on confiscating private property. There are two components to turn back the clock argument. First, it is not practical to carry out the policy. Second, the Jews as well have had their property taken. See the chart below. The fact is that most people do not know that close to 1 million Jews were pushed out of places like Yemen, Egypt, Morocco, Syria, Iraq, and Iran since Israel was founded. You must make this case. The strongest argument by far in talking about the claim of confiscation is this. While Palestinians complained that they lost homes and property when they left Israel in 1948, just as many Jews were pushed out of Arab states since that time, also losing their homes and property. We cannot simply turn back the clock for either side and must look towards the future. So I want to note, I agree, most people do not know that there are just Jewish property claims in some of these Arab countries. But notice that they make it sound as if these events happened unrelated to each other. What happened first was the Nakba, and the Palestinians had wrong done to them. There was a reaction in parts of the Arab world, not universally. Remember, Avi Shlaim talks about the fact that the Iraqi Jews did not want to leave Iraq. They felt Iraqi. They didn't feel Zionist. They didn't feel connected to Israel. The Yemeni Jews liked being in Yemen. They didn't really want to go. And when they came, they were dumped and considered inferior animals. And they were told to de-Arabize. A lot of times you'll hear Israelis shouting at Ethiopian Jews, go back to Africa or go back home. But I thought this was the Jewish homeland. I thought all Jews were welcome here. No, it's only white European Jews. The rest of them are inferior Arab trash, and they need to be de-Arabized. So when you talk about what happened here, there is also not a mention of the fact that Mossad placed bombs in synagogues, this was discovered later, and carried out terror attacks to create instability in the Jewish communities to get them to move to Israel. And then things accelerated when these people started to see within their own countries the formation of a separate idea, state within a state. That, well, I thought you were Moroccan, I thought you were Egyptian, I thought you were Yemeni, and now you are this this Israeli thing and you're going to get another citizenship and you might be a destabilizing force inside our country, yeah, you should leave. But the idea that these things are connected, meaning, oh, both sides have done wrong, so we can't turn back the clock. One thing led to another. If the Israelis don't confiscate Palestinian land and expel the population, there is no way that the Arab countries would have done that, because they lived with these Jews for centuries. For centuries, they lived in peace. And these Jews had carved out specific niches within these communities, specific types of activities. In Yemen, I think, for example, they were the merchant class. And they've been in that position for centuries. These slower, older countries that are more traditional, they're not seeking for fast change. They're not looking for Uber and all these exciting things that end up destroying countries as well. That's a conversation for another time. But when you think about what they're trying to do here, is they're trying to equate the two, not seeing that one is a cause and one is an effect. And you have to ask the question, why is it that these close to 1 million Jews were pushed out? I don't accept that number, especially because there was a voluntary repatriation of Yemeni Jews peacefully by aircraft. They weren't kicked out. They just wanted them all there because the Israelis wanted more Jews on the land so they could make a better case, and they wanted free or low-cost slave Jewish labor. And who else to do it but inferior Arab Jews? We want them doing that labor. We want them to be our hewers of wood and carriers of water. If oil-rich nations like Saudi Arabia and Iran invested in the West Bank instead of investing in terrorist camps and suicide bombers, the Palestinians would have a much higher standard of living and a much better quality of life. They've tried to invest, and then those things get bulldozed or destroyed. We saw in a Max Blumenthal and Daniel Cohen documentary about a building from an Italian investor inside Gaza that was bombed. There have been investments, and they're destroyed by the Israelis. Before demonstrating effective right of return language, there are several rules to the right of return debate. Number 1, call it a demand. Americans don't like it when either side makes demands on the other. It sounds too strident and uncompromising. Then say, Palestinians aren't content with their own state. Now they are demanding territory inside Israel. Where is inside Israel? That would imply there are borders. Can you tell me what the borders of Israel are? I know I sound like a broken record here, but this is a key talking point, and I want you to use it to your advantage. This involves people who never lived within the borders of Israel. Yeah, and there are people in Israel who've never lived there either. And yet they have a right to move and settle in Israel, except that then the people who are descendants of the people who lived there for centuries, they're not allowed to. So even in this statement, I can't even read it without stopping. This involves people who never lived within the borders of Israel. Oh, you mean like that family that moved from Brooklyn last week? Like those people? A case could be made that those who actually had homes within Israeli boundaries might be entitled to some compensation. Why is there a might? If you owned homes and it was confiscated, why would you not be entitled to confiscation? Look, they're even hedging here. They don't even want to say. They say might. But Americans will reject the notion that the children and grandchildren who are born elsewhere have any rights or claims to anything. But that's not true. America has inheritance law. And there are children and grandchildren who have rights of inheritance of homes where they've never lived. If your grandmother in America deeds you land in Kansas and you were never in America and you never had anything to do with Kansas, you would still be entitled to that land. That's how it works. These statements don't even make legal sense. Emphasize, at some point in the future, the right of return is already an ill-defined concept with questionable justification. It is not an ill-defined concept. It's the right of return. It's not questionable justification. It's a right. It's enshrined in UN resolutions. Pointing out that there is no start date, no end date, no ultimate conclusion, no final settlement will effectively undermine the Palestinian argument. No. All the land that was taken can be given back. End of. If so, if not, how is it that Israel demanded all of this money from Germany? Where was the start date? Where was the end date? Where is the ultimate conclusion? Where's the final settlement? And I think Germany is still guilted into giving money to the Israelis to this day. Emphasize that this is not about the territories. This is about the state of Israel. Okay, what are the borders to the state of Israel? Americans will assume that this is an issue about land. It must be wrapped up in the Palestinian effort to create a country which they support. You have to be clear that this is about Israel itself, from Tel Aviv to Haifa. a demand for land inside internationally accepted Israeli borders. Oh, internationally accepted Israeli borders? What are those? Interesting, that's actually mentioned here. Mass Palestinian immigration. Thanks to 9/11 and the continuing threat of terrorism, Americans are particularly afraid of mass immigration of anyone right now. Comparing the challenges facing Americans in dealing with unrestricted immigration and Israel's situation will be well received. Now, I'm going to do a review on my main channel on the question of immigration in America sometime. That deserves its own treatment. I can't really address it here. But it is a good point that Luntz is making here by using the term mass Palestinian immigration. But it's really weak insofar as this is not the thing that Americans are really thinking about in terms of everything that's going on. There are so many other polarizing things around Palestine and Israel. Using this as a winning strategy feels like a loser to me. Undermining the peace process. This is the ultimate argument because Americans believe no demand is so important that it should be allowed to derail the effort to achieve peace. Except who derails the peace process? Israel. Over and over and over. A tough question and an adequate response. Question. Could you explain for those who may not understand the right of return what the right of return means for the Palestinians? Answer. It is basically the Palestinian demand that all Palestinians, not just Palestinians who have lived here historically, but their children and grandchildren, should be able at some point in the future to flood what is currently Israel with mass Palestinian immigration. Now keep in mind, if those families had never left, their children and grandchildren would have been on the land. So the idea that they would flood it implies that there wasn't room for them. But there wouldn't be room if someone else hadn't stolen their land. For us, it's a tremendously worrisome statement by the Palestinians that they're not willing to give up this demand. Because at the time when we are trying to achieve a peace based on the notion of two states for two peoples, it suggests that the Palestinians are not going to be content with one state. Why would they? The Palestinians are saying at the outset they want a Palestinian state for the Palestinian people, which we accept, but they are also making demands for land inside what everyone recognizes as Israel. Okay, so what are the borders of Israel? And that is unacceptable. What are the borders of Israel? A tough follow-up question and response. And yet you believe that Jews, even converts, have the right to return. Even Jews who may never have set foot in Israel in 1,000 years have a right to come. And yet Palestinians who actually lived in Tel Aviv don't have the right to go back to their homes? Isn't that hypocrisy? Here's the deflection. Here's the inability to answer the question. Anybody who looks at the history of the century will recognize that Jews over the world have been brutally persecuted and hounded because of their Jewish identity wherever they lived. No one in the world has ever been persecuted except the Jews. Remember that that's rule number one. Unfortunately, some 60 years ago, we were witness to the atrocities perpetrated against some number because they had no place to go. The notion there should be a place no matter what where Jews can go for refuge was one of the reasons for the establishment of the State of Israel. Why is it that Jews cannot go for refuge in the United States, in the United Kingdom, in other parts of the world? There are plenty of places. Jews live in peace in Iran. This is very different than the Palestinians saying we want to have a state for our people, but we also want land in yours. We accept the former, we cannot accept the latter. This is not true. Reverse it. Israelis say we want to have a state for our people, but we also want your land. That's every accusation is a confession. I don't want to talk about this too much, but chapter 14 says talk about Arab Israelis, and it's always the same talking points. I've seen it a lot in the comments section. When I started the project on my main Stephen Heiner channel and here on Palestine Bookshelf, they're always repeating these same things. The thing is, it's always the Israeli Jews who are saying this. I've never heard an Israeli Arab make this argument. And I think if we were to ask the Israeli Arabs, how do you feel about your position in Israeli society? They would not make these talking point comments. These are always Jews that say this or Americans. But I've never heard an Israeli Arab, and I hate using that phrase, but I understand the meaning of it. And even if one Israeli Arab or 17 of them went on television, that wouldn't be representative of all of the Israeli Arabs. Israeli Arabs have been able to vote for prime minister and parliament since 1948. No other Arab nation has such a long record of democracy. Answer the question, could Israeli Arabs become prime minister in Israel? And realize Mizrahi Jews are not even allowed. The only Jews that are allowed to become prime minister in Israel are European Jews. There is no way a Sephardic or Mizrahi Jew, a Middle Eastern Arab Jew, is going to be allowed to become prime minister of Israel. So say, well, forget about the Israeli Arabs. I mean, uh, Arab Arab Jews are not allowed to become prime minister. Arab Israelis serve in parliament, on the Supreme Court, and in leadership positions in every area of Israeli government, business, and law. The average Israeli Arab has a higher income and higher standard of living than in any other Middle Eastern country because they get free subsidies from the United States. An Arab Israeli has the freedom to criticize the government and its leadership openly and publicly. Not so sure about that assertion. In any other Middle Eastern country, public criticism of the government will lead to jail time and worse. I mean, what do you think happens? What happens to people in the United States who question Israel these days in 2025? Is that going to be updated? Israeli Arab women have exactly the same rights as men in every way. No other Arab society can make that claim. Israeli Arabs have more rights, more privileges, more opportunities, more freedom in Israel than they have in any other Middle Eastern country, except the fact to question Israel. Words that do not work. In a few hours, Israel will wake up to a new morning of funerals of babies, of innocent mothers and fathers, and this is what we face right now. Right, because the Palestinians have never faced that. It's only the Israelis who face that. I'm only going to read this because he creates a checklist and says, look at how great this was, PR-wise. So this is President Obama. If we are looking at the region as a whole and communicating a message to the Arab world and the Muslim world that we are ready to initiate a new partnership based on mutual respect and mutual interest, then I think that we can make significant progress. Let's run down the list of reasons why this language scored through the roof. Overall theme of mutuality? Check. Appeal to the well-being and safety of children on both sides? Check. Humanizing the issue? Check. Acknowledging the errors of the past but focusing on the future? Check. Emphasizing the need to improve living conditions for the Palestinians and security for Israelis? Check. Finishing with a call for progress? Check. The only problem is, like so much of Obama's policies, it's all of this and it's nothing else. Remember that Obama said he wanted to close Guantanamo. He didn't close Guantanamo. He wanted to move forward this for the Palestinians. Did he move forward? No. He wanted to do more for Native Americans. Did he do so? No. With their heads, most liberals still support Israel, but their hearts go out to whomever looks like the biggest underdog. Right now, they feel that is the Palestinians, right? Because anyone would ever think Israel is the underdog, other than the Israelis. It explains why liberals have become so openly hostile since the start of the Gaza war, and why life for pro-Israeli communicators will only get more difficult in the future. There is far too little sympathy for the plight of Israelis from America's left, rightly so, and incredible emotional support for the plight of the Palestinians, because it's true, it's right, it's human. It is critical to make sure that liberals understand this is a fight between Israel and Iran and its proxies, not just a territorial dispute between Israelis and Palestinians. In Israel's short 61 years, they have faced 7 wars and 2 intifadas. Why is that? Almost no Israeli family has escaped the tragedies of war unscathed. And what about Palestinian families? Because they believe all people are basically good and hate war, liberals think diplomacy can and should solve almost every conflict. I disagree with these assertions. I don't think that liberals hate war because they've supported so much of it. Hillary Clinton supported the Iraq War under no evidence, and unfortunately many so-called liberals went along with it. Don't make the mistake of thinking you will win friends in the liberal community or from Europeans by publicly opposing opportunities for America or Israel to speak to Iran or their proxies. They believe in engagement. Thus, your job is to remind liberals that engagement is an important process, but it is not an outcome. The outcome we want is security and peace for both sides. Many on the left see an Israel versus Palestinian crisis where Israel is Goliath and the Palestinians are David, because it's true. It is critical they understand that this is an Arab-Israeli crisis and the force undermining peace is Iran and their proxies Hezbollah, Hamas, and Islamic Jihad. You must not call Hamas just Hamas. Call them what they are. Iran-backed Hamas. Indeed, when they know that Iran is behind Hamas and Hezbollah, they will be much more supportive. Even though they couldn't find Iran on a map, even though they don't know what the capital of Iran is, even though they don't know who the leader of Iran is, even though they don't know that we overthrew their government in 1953. Remember, if you just say Iran, people get scared. Today, immigration is a dirty word. Some advocates like to make the case for Israel by emphasizing how it takes in the distressed peoples of the world. Yeah, mostly it takes in a lot of pedophiles. This is simply not a strong argument with most Americans right now. Words that do not work. No nation in the Middle East, in fact, no nation in the world, has more immigrants from more countries than Israel. No nation is more willing to open its arms to people suffering from political oppression or economic hardship, or charges of pedophilia. It is a true melting pot of nations and cultures from Europe, Asia, and Africa, in which European Israelis yell at Ethiopian Jews and tell them to go back home to Africa. Why did Israel use disproportionate force in Gaza? Answer: the devastation in Gaza is heartbreaking. So much suffering that was so unnecessary, and none of it had to happen. Oh, this is good. Let's keep going. Israel left Gaza, uprooting 9,000 Israeli families, and turned it over peacefully to the Palestinians. Hold on. When you say uprooting, it would make it sound like they lived there for more than 5 minutes. They moved these settlers in illegally. Illegally. And they did not leave Gaza. All they did was remove the settlers. They then put a siege on by land, air, and sea. They had every opportunity to succeed. Support from the international community, financial aid from across the globe, and the aspirations of the people. All of this was blocked by Israel. Israel gave up Gaza with every hope that this was the first step towards peace with the Palestinians, and all they got was rockets in return. This is not true. It is stated on the record in cabinet minutes and in speeches that Sharon gave up Gaza so he could pivot to the West Bank. He knew that Gaza was a hornet's nest. He didn't want to deal with it. He left, and so he could focus on colonizing faster in the West Bank. It's not true that they gave it up when a first step towards peace. In fact, I can't remember the name of the official, but he said that it was to put formaldehyde on the peace process. It was not the first step towards peace. It was to freeze the peace process, so-called peace process. All they got was rockets in return. Not dozens, not hundreds, thousands of rockets. Not monthly, not weekly, literally daily. Even since the fighting in Gaza stopped, more than 160 rockets have been fired from Gaza towards Israel since Israel stopped fighting. What would you have done or wanted your government to do if you and your family were under rocket attack every day? When will the terrorists in Gaza stop shooting rockets at Israeli civilians? When you withdraw from the land, you withdraw your settlers, you withdraw your security fence, you withdraw your blockade, you withdraw your siege. Then they will do what they want to do, which is work, build up for their families, get them educated, and help them build better lives. That's what they're interested in. And they will take you to court internationally to get their land back. And they have every right to do so, and I will support it as best I can, with money if I can. Question: are you willing to divide Jerusalem? Under Israel's control, Jerusalem is open and free to Christians, Muslims, Jews, and all others who come to pray and visit in security and peace. Every religion is welcome. Every religion is free to worship as they please. This was not the case before 1967. When Jerusalem was controlled by Arab leaders, Jews were not allowed to visit their holy sites, and they were not welcomed in Palestinian-controlled areas today. Christians are also persecuted in many areas of the West Bank, but as long as Israel controls Jerusalem, all will be welcomed. First of all, this is not true. There are various times much further back in history when there was restrictions against different religions depending on who was in charge. But even then, it wasn't banning. When the Latin Kingdom of Jerusalem existed, Muslims were allowed to practice their religion, but I don't think inside Jerusalem. But they didn't have to convert. They were allowed to be Muslims. I think they were allowed to be Jews. Same thing, I think, when we had the Ottomans in charge, there were restrictions, but the Basilica of the Holy Sepulchre was open for Christians to worship in under the Ottomans. So this idea that Christians are persecuted in areas of the West Bank, I need to see some sort of evidence for that. But when Jerusalem was controlled by Arab leaders, Jews were not allowed to visit their holy sites. This is also not true. I think there were just not as many Jewish holy sites that had been built up as Jewish holy sites because there weren't that many Jews living in Palestine. But the ones who lived in Palestine were integrated into the society. It was the Zionists who did something different. All right, well, if you made it to the end, please comment in below, I made it to the end. And let me know if you were able to deal with my volume and my irritation today. Once again, I apologize for maybe getting too emotional at points, but when you've studied as much as I have, and I hope that you've studied even more than I have, I hope to continue to learn all throughout this process. It's frustrating to see such stupid stuff served up in an official document. This thing was paid for, and then given to people. Say, make sure you study this before you go on CNN or the BBC. Make sure you use words that work. So many of these words that work are just full of lies, assertions, unproven assertions. Yeah, I just keep lies, 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 lies. That's all I can characterize most of this document with. Still going to keep it. I'm not going to burn it. This is an important reference point. Can't buy it. As I said, there's a link in the description below, but you can help this channel for free by hitting like, subscribe, sharing this with people you think could benefit from hearing this and who are willing to hear somebody use elevated volume through parts of the review. Another way that you can support this channel is by supporting me using Buy Me a Coffee or PayPal. You can send a one-time donation just to thank me for this particular video. If you want to support me on an ongoing basis, there's Patreon and YouTube membership. There's links to that below as well. You could also support the channel by sponsoring a future video. You can pull a book from my Amazon wish list. If you look there below, you'll see different books. So you'll see books that are obviously about Palestine and then books that are not at all about Palestine. That's for my main Stephen Heiner channel, which I invite you to check out. But obviously, if you want to sponsor a book for this channel, pick one of the books and you can scroll through and see which one interests you. Buy it for me, send it my way, and then I will review it as quickly as I can, and I'll thank you in advance for doing that. A reminder that when this channel gets monetized, the profits will go to support the Palestine Children's Relief Fund, which helps Palestinian children get medical care who could not otherwise get it. There's a link to them below. Please visit them directly. Feel free to support them directly, but you can support them indirectly by watching as many videos as you can on this channel. That drives up our hour count. The number of hours watched leads to monetization. When we get monetized, we'll be able to send them money as well. So please consider helping us by watching as many videos as you can until we get monetized. Until next time, enjoy your reading.